This is my first time, and likely my only time, sharing something here. I'm not even sure what's compelling me, but I've got a story that needs to be told, and everyone else I've tried to share it with has left me alienated. The department has me on a mental well-being break. Clinical talk for suspended until I get my shit together. 2 counselors I've spoken with have said it's PTSD. But I know this isn't the case. My wife said I was being obsessive and losing touch. But now she has gone to stay with her mom. And based on the manila envelope the post office informs me is due to arrive soon, I've got divorce papers en route. So here I am, writing down what sounds like an absolute lunacy while I keep an eye on my surroundings, because in a day or two, I might not be able to bother anyone with this story again. I don't blame my wife. I love her deeply, and I know it's a sentiment she shares, but when someone you love refuses to partake in what you believe would help, what choice is really left? The things I've ranted about would seem delusional and dangerous to myself as well if I hadn't witnessed it personally. I don't blame the department. It would be outright irresponsible to have me out on the streets with the things I've claimed. But again, they just aren't seeing what I am. I don't blame the 2 counselors I've spoken with, one from the department and the other from the VA. I've got a body of work ripe for the diagnosis they gave me. The truth is, I know something horrible is loose in Helix County. I'll do whatever I need to protect the people I love, the place I call home, and I'm scared it is beyond my capability to handle. Helix County has been home for me for 26 of my 30 years. I was born and raised here. My dad, a fabricator at the aircraft assembly plant, and my mom, a waitress at one of the diners. I played linebacker for Tavern High School, even set the record for most tackles by a player, season, and career. A record that a senior is set to break this year. And I'm sad I probably won't get to see that. After high school, I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps as a rifleman, where I did 2 tours in Afghanistan. I was even awarded a Silver Star for valor. When I returned, I got a job with the Helix County Sheriff's Department. After 2 years as a patrol deputy, I was assigned to the Special Enforcement Bureau Tactical Team, SWAT, in everything but name. Some people may have lofty dreams, but for me, I've lived my dream. Hobbies and work that provide bursts of adrenaline, then coming home to my high school sweetheart, who to me will have always been the hottest cheerleader at Tavern High. A record that will never be broken. We had even begun discussing the possibility of having kids. Hell, she might be pregnant right now. So when I began to perceive this threat, it was only natural I'd do whatever it takes to intercept it. I'm not, have never been, the type to not meet a challenge. It is a very core tenet of my being. Unfortunately, it seems I may have come across a challenge I can't meet. Without further ado, let me tell you the story of how my life has fallen into ruin. It all started a little less than a year ago, with what should have been the highlight of a law enforcement officer's career. A night when I stopped a very bad guy and saved a young girl's life. Just want to take a moment to thank everybody who's recently started to subscribe and pay attention to the stories. These stories come from a lot of amazing authors who have been gracious enough to grant me permission to narrate these. So thank you. Thank you for that. I do appreciate all the positive comments that are coming in as well. So yeah, man, it all helps. So let's get back into it. Summertime in Helix County is unbearably hot. Such is life in a high desert. The thermometer topped out at 115 degrees that day, which suspended any planned training for the day. Instead, we just went through gear checks and hung around the station waiting for any potential call-outs. Frankly, I was hoping we would have a peaceful day. There's a weird kind of compromise for a tactical team during heat waves. Usually, the vast majority of our call-outs is for a barricaded suspect, which during the days like these amounts to establishing a perimeter, killing the air conditioning, and letting them swelter until they give up. The other side of that coin is we have to endure that same heat and tactical gear in heavy metal vehicles. All right, boys, off your asses. We got a call. Lieutenant Robert Howell, a man who believes he is the epitomization of a modern cowboy, and the team leader of the tactical team, announced as he entered, destroying our hopes beneath the spurs of his boots. Barricaded suspect with a hostage in the Plainview Estates. An audible groan left the lips of every team member, knowing we had just been dragged into exactly what we were dreading. Nonetheless, we were professionals, so we grabbed our equipment and began moving it into the Bearcat, preparing to head out. By 1:30, the giant armored vehicle was rolling out of the garage, accompanied by two cruisers with their sirens on as we sped toward the residential neighborhood. "What's the deal, LT?" Darius Milton, a longtime friend who had made the tactical at the same time I had, inquired. "Another guy slap his wife, lock himself inside to try to get out of it?" "Don't have all the details, but it doesn't appear so. Nosy neighbor reported a break-in, saying she heard screaming and gunshots. Patrol car responded, said they arrived just as the intruder was leaving with a child. Apparently, a few shots got fired. They think they wounded the suspect, but he retreated back inside. Negotiator is on scene trying to make contact now." "Armed pervert. Great." Darius spoke quietly to me, not wanting to interrupt Howell as he was on the radio. "Dude deserves to get shot in his nuts and thrown on the asphalt. Instead, he's probably bleeding to death in an air-conditioned room. Won't be air-conditioned for long. Maybe we'll get lucky. He'll poke his head out of the window." It was 2:15 p.m. when we arrived on scene, entering the hottest part of the day. The Bearcat was parked near the front of the residence, other cruisers being used to block off the neighborhood, and we all dismounted, Howell going to speak with the negotiator as the rest of us took in the scene. There was a police car near the Bearcat. Several of the windows shattered and the passenger door pocked with bullet holes. A small pool of blood dripped from the bottom opening of the door, cooking on the hot asphalt. Looking out on the car was a 2-story tract home, recently painted. The front door and the glass panes framing it shot out. "Looks like a lot more than a few shots fired." I spoke aloud, more to myself than anything, but Darius nodded as he surveyed the same things I was looking at. "Hope the deputy's okay, but that doesn't look good," Darius replied, but the fatalism in his tone indicated just how little hope he held. A Helix County deputy hadn't been killed in the line of duty in nearly 4 years, and we both knew we were looking at a real possibility of that streak ending. "Gather round," Howell called out as we joined him behind the security of the Bearcat's thick walls. There was a rage in his eyes, cold, pure hatred, and he spat before correcting the brim of his Stetson. "We got a real nasty son of a bitch in there, apparently. Deputy Beagle took a bullet when they confronted the perp. He's en route to Memorial as we speak, but in critical condition." Those words led to an uncomfortable silence. All of us well aware that as we stood there, one of our colleagues was now fighting for their life. After a moment, I broke the silence. "So what happened here, Lieutenant?" "The house belongs to John and Claire Treppa." It helped to focus on the task at hand, but there was still a clear tone of anger in Howell's voice. "Both cars in the driveway belong to them, but the third is listed in a stolen vehicle report from Barron County. According to the neighbor, it pulled up, and a man got out and broke into the house. Gunshots and screaming followed, at which point Blue Hair called the cops. Deputies responded, arrived as the suspect was leaving with the Treppa's 13-year-old daughter. He fired at them. They returned fire, wounded him in the shoulder. Beagle's partner chased him inside, but the suspect holed up in the master bedroom with the girl. He's been threatening to kill her if anyone tries to come in the room." "What's the game plan?" Darius asked. And much like me, I could tell he was dreading the thought of a long and drawn-out negotiation. We were men of action. And in a scenario as charged as this, there was an overwhelming desire to simply burst through the door and finish it. "Darius, Cliff, you two go relieve the officer inside. Keep that door under watch. If you got a chance, take it. Otherwise, we wait for the negotiations to end. The rest of us will keep watch outside unless something changes." We didn't protest. We wouldn't, but neither of us were happy about that order. It was scorching hot. The second floor of the house would only be getting worse, with its western-facing windows getting cooked as the sun started to dip. And clad in heavy, dark tactical gear, we'd be stuck in a personal sauna for what could conceivably be hours. All the while, just waiting for this lunatic to decide whether he wanted to bleed to death or come out guns blazing. For some reason, the thought of a peaceful surrender was just not even considerable. Without any complaint, Darius and I double-checked our rifles, strapped on our helmets, and headed inside. Now, I've seen some grisly shit in my time. The aftermath of drone strikes on crowded buildings, the insides of corrugated sheds shredded by a full belt of .50 caliber, human bodies absolutely vaporized. So why did this strike me as so bad? Despite the severe heat, I felt chilled, cold sweat running down my exposed face. "Damn," Darius spoke first as we entered the living room. I could tell he was affected by the scene as much as I was. John Treppa, what could be assumed was John Treppa, sat on the couch. Clearly he'd been watching television when the break-in occurred. He had one arm draped over the back of the couch, half turned to look at whatever noise caught his attention when the intrusion began. Had he seen it? Hard to say. The top half of his skull was missing. Chunks of it spread all over the living room wall. Drips of viscera splattered against the television, which was still flickering with images underneath. This wasn't a clean decapitation. It was a hate-filled act. The killer had stood there and shot him multiple times to inflict that kind of carnage. As we entered the hallway, we came across Claire, another victim of this evil person's sickness. Unlike her husband, she hadn't been shot, and her death had all the looks of being slow and brutal. Her blouse, it must have been blue, but you'd be hard-pressed to say. It was tattered to an extreme, a multitude of puncture wounds made with a bladed weapon. The coroner would later confirm 47 entry wounds. And it was so soaked in her blood that even now it looked fresh. The carpet beneath her was likewise stained, and I had to imagine that when the time came for cleanup, they would have to remove the flooring down to the cement, and would likely find a stain there as well. Arterial splatter lined the walls, and even the ceiling. Just the most nightmarish visage I had ever seen since joining the sheriff's department. On task, we've still got a live person to worry about, Darius told me, and I nodded, dragging myself back to reality. The consideration of the dead scheduled for later hours. I hope we still do. This fucker's clearly not right. Bloody shoe prints laid out our path. 2 sets, leading us away from the atrocious acts, though their very presence had permeated the house. The first set of prints weren't as deeply stained in the carpet, almost like a stamp that had barely grazed an ink pad. And from the pattern, they obviously belonged to the standard issue shoes the department provided uniformed deputies. Deeper imprinted, as if they had been so thoroughly soaked in blood that it started hiding distinguishing features, or the worn sole prints of a set of hiking boots. Both went to the same place, and before long, we found ourselves at the stairwell, an ascending U-turn that led to the second floor. "Friendly," I called out as we began advancing. The deputy at the top of the stairs turning only temporarily to see us before returning his focus to the door at the end of the hallway. I recognized him instantly. The aged features of graying hair. Deputy Polak had been a training officer with the department since before I hit my teenage years. His face looked gaunt, sweat-covered, but his eyes were so focused in a mixture of horror and rage. "Relax, Polak. We've got it from here," Darius told him quietly, and we both moved to assume better angles. Darius laying down on the hallway carpet, his rifle pointed at the door at the end of the hall, while I found cover behind a credenza and did the same. "Yeah," Polak spoke in a low tone, his thoughts clearly a mess, and for the first time, the reality of the day was dawning on him. He holstered his pistol, took a few steps down, and then turned back to face us. "That guy isn't right. There was just something off about the whole thing. He isn't going to come out peacefully. You two better be ready to go in there." "We're ready. Don't worry." "The girl is still alive?" I asked, not once taking my eyes off the door as I shouldered my rifle, lined my scope up with the center of the doorway. "I've heard her whimper and cry a few times. I don't think he's hurt her yet, but given the opportunity, he's going to. You see what he did down there?" More anger, more fear in Polak's voice. And oddly, I found comfort in knowing that as steeled a veteran as him, was equally disturbed by what had happened in this house. "Just be ready. We need something. Some small sliver of good to come out of here. and the only thing left is that poor girl's life. With that, Pollock began down the stairs, but he sloped at the bottom, looking back up at us. She's about 4'7". He's around 6'3". Nothing more needed to be said. The quiet implication found by both Darius and I. We adjusted our rifles slightly, our aim drifting just a tad higher. I thumbed the fire selector to the middle option. A burst of 3 rounds. Then I settled in for a long wait. There were no words to be exchanged between us, just singularly focused on the door at the end of the hall. Still, I couldn't help but think about the carnage below us. What kind of hatred lurked in a man's heart to perform those kinds of acts? An hour passed, and then 2, and then 3. The heat was sweltering in that upstairs hallway as the sun baked the house, and I can only imagine how much worse it must have been in the confines of that bedroom. Every so often, we'd hear the young girl cry, sob, groan, yet never heard the kinds of sounds that would justify forced entry. Occasionally, we would hear him, the man we would later identify as Thomas Friends, scream or yell, likely into a phone, to the negotiator outside. Finally, that horrible moment came upon us at 6:27 p.m. No, please, no! She was shrieking, voice filled with terror, and I empathized. I felt it myself. Now, we've got to go, Darius urged, and I didn't hesitate to agree. Hurrying to the end of the hall, we didn't wait. We didn't radio for backup or inform them we were going in. There was no time. I stood in front of the door, Darius just slightly angled to my side. Again, that poor girl had already lived hell, and now she might have to endure the last bit of it. Do it, I urged, unnecessarily as Darius's foot was already moving. He kicked the door just under the handle. A powerful stroke, and the kick blew the flimsy-made tracked home door open wide, pushing it off one hinge, the other creaking as it was all that remained between the door and the carpet. I saw Thomas there, hand on the girl's throat, his other hand holding a knife high and preparing to bring it down. He looked at me, but in that moment, I didn't even process what would later come to startle me. I just pulled the trigger. Once, depressing it, and the rifle fired 3 bullets. One through the sternum, one through the chest, one through the collar. I'd have been hard-pressed to group them better on the range. He fell backwards, gurgling, clutching at the wounds that would never be staunched. Get out of here, now, I ordered, and Darius quickly moved in, grabbing the girl, lifting her up and hurriedly moving her out of the room and down the stairs. Just as the bodies downstairs were not the first I'd seen, this was not the first life I had taken. It was, however, the first time I've ever watched someone closely as their life drained away. I'll be honest, it was disconcerting. I knew the person dying in front of me was more monster than man. I'd be validated in this belief later, that I would not be sinned for feeling some small sense of joy in what I had done. But it eluded me then. And instead, I just felt a sense of raw dread. Something metaphysically wrong with what I was seeing. Now, I need to clarify. This recollection has undoubtedly been tainted by what would happen in the days, weeks, and months after. In the particular seconds after, I wasn't aware of any of this. My eyes were focused on his, and I kept my weapon trained on him. If he so much as flinched, I had every intention of subjecting him to the same treatment he had given John Treppa downstairs, and part of me wanted nothing less. Instead, he stayed still, slumped against the wall, his hand clasping at the bullet wound to his collar, which was pumping an immense and fatal amount of blood down his shirt. His eyes never left mine, and as he sat there, wheezing and struggling with what would be his dying breaths, he smiled, dirty teeth, wet with the blood that began spilling down his lip and chin. It was a look of success, and to this day it still twists my stomach to think about that gloating, satisfied expression on this bastard's face. After brutally killing 2 people and ruining a young girl's life, like he had accomplished something. In hindsight, and I guess he had. But also, in hindsight, I wish I'd squeezed that trigger again. Not that it would have changed anything, but at least I would have that more graphic memory, as opposed to the one I was left with. Instead, I just kept still, weapon ready, until I heard Hallwell and the rest of the team enter the room. They checked and secured Thomas's corpse. At this point, the adrenaline faded, and I got my first proper glance of the room. Friends had been busy in the time he had been held up inside the Treppa's master bedroom. An autopsy on his corpse would later confirm 4 bullet wounds. Forensics would match 3 to my rifle, but the 4th, technically the first, was a match to Deputy Pollock's pistol. He had hit the suspect in the shoulder. The wound was clean. The bullet lodged in his shoulder, except it had additional markings that would be determined as self-inflicted with a knife. Friends had been poking the wound with his knife during the entire standoff, likely to make it continue bleeding more than it was. A rational mind might assume he was trying to dig the bullet out, but one look around the room would dispel that notion. The walls were covered in symbols, painted in his own blood. I couldn't tell you what they mean. I know the detectives recovered a tome, and I mean tome as in a very old book, that uses those same symbols throughout from Friends' stolen car. And that it is just as morbid and upsetting as what was written on those walls. They were never matched to any known language or cipher, even with several experts consulted. I'm sorry, I can't show them, but I've lost access to any of these case materials due to my suspension. I've got to believe that there's something profane, some ritual or words of some rite that they are tied into why Friends seems so happy despite the fact that I mortally wounded him and interrupted whatever he intended to do with that poor young girl. Howell ordered me out of the room once it was secured. Now the scene of an officer involved shooting in which I was the main perpetrator. I was happy to leave. The symbols on the wall disturbed me, and the satisfied smile on the face of Fringe's corpse made my blood run cold. When I headed down the stairs, I did my best to avoid looking at the scenes of carnage on the first floor, which were now being documented. But I can still recall them vividly, even now. They aren't anything I'll ever forget. If there was some hope for respite with exiting the Treppa's residence, it was dashed as soon as I stepped out. A gust of wind hit me as I stepped out the front door, and my sweat-soaked face instantly went clammy and deathly cold. My stomach turned, rattled, lurched as the enormity of everything I dealt with the past few hours came home to roost. I turned and vomited into a hedge, spilling out the entire contents of my breakfast and lunch in one quick burst. It brought me to my knees, my head swimming. Unstrapping my helmet, I planted the dome in the grass and rested my face against it as I knelt. Instantly, I was thinking back to the hallway, storming in through the door. I saw the young girl, held on the floor, and I saw Friends, his knife raised and ready to plunge down into her. He looked up at me, eyes wide, but not in any kind of surprise, in readiness, in anticipation, as if he had expected this all along, wanted it. His face, it was distorted. The features shifted to give it a more menacing look, more wrinkled, bones more pronounced, almost a corruption of what a human should look like an abnormal monster from a book or a movie. Even his teeth looked different, sharp and pointed, dripping with black ichor. Cliff, man, are you okay? Darius came over to me, kneeling next to me and resting a hand on my back, patting it. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just the heat. Some of you might wonder why I lied at this moment. Well, it won't be the last time. It is worth remembering that at this stage I had no clue what was happening. And more so, I knew that talking about anything like this would get me sent straight to a shrink and on the suspension list, where I inevitably wound up anyway. Perhaps if I had been honest from the start, things might have gone differently. Not so badly. Maybe some of the troubles could have been avoided, but it's too late for that now. Detectives arrived and assumed control of the scene, which meant the tactical team was due back at the station for debriefing, and my inevitable appointment with this investigation of my shooting. As the Bearcat passed the barricades at the end of the street, the local news was waiting with the cordon. They would never get any more than a brief statement from a spokesperson on what had happened. But much to my embarrassment, one of their cameras had captured me vomiting and would run it on the nightly program. House of Horrors is just too much for even law enforcement to bear. If I didn't wind up torpedoing my career down the road, I'm sure that video would have been happy to step up to the task. When we got back to the station, I checked my gear in and instantly downed 2 bottles of water, hoping against hope that it was really dehydration affecting me. But no. I was still chilled, uneasy. All I wanted was to go home, crawl into bed, my wife's comforting arms. But I still had a long night in front of me. I vomited once more in the bathroom, entirely fluid this time, as I had no food left in my body, and was busy cleaning myself in front of a mirror when Howell came to collect me. It was time to rehash the day for a non-biased set of eyes. Internal affairs is a dirty word in a lot of police films, and apparently in some actual departments, but I've never had any real issues with them. If you're hoping for a story of them trying to jam me up, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. They knew as well as I did that it was a good shoot, but routines and regulations have to be followed. So I explained the events as they had happened to them 3 times. My story being compared to Darius's version, and there was really no difference in the retellings because there was nothing really to hide. I saw an armed suspect putting the life of a civilian in immediate danger, and I acted to stop it with an appropriate amount of force. It was about as textbook as it gets. The only thing I concealed was that whenever I thought back to friends, I saw the distorted face. All that was left was to review the camera footage from the day. There are 4 recordings of what happened in that room. Helix County mandates that all officers wear a body camera. It's a small chest-mounted device that is always recording. For whatever reason, I think Howell just likes having what he considers badass footage. There's a secondary camera mounted to the barrel of our rifles, packaged in with the laser sight device. We ran through Darius's recordings first, though towards the end his body cam was obscured by carrying Trepa's daughter. And his rifle's camera was pointed downwards after that moment as well. My body camera didn't fare much better. The way I held my rifle meant it was mostly capturing my arms and my weapon, to which I was told I needed to reposition the camera in future incidents. My rifle captured it in all perfect detail. However, the video matched my statement perfectly. It showed us advancing down the hall, Darius's clean kick and breach of the door, and just as I said, there was friends preparing to kill the girl before I put 3 bullets in him. My skin went clammy again. I felt my heart beating faster, sweat beginning to pool on my brow. It was friends. There was no denying that, but it wasn't the gloating, smiling human face. It was the monstrosity, the twisted and foreign feature that I had seen when I was throwing up on the lawn. What the hell? One of the investigators chimed up as he saw it. Recoil must have glitched the camera. Department bargain shops. Probably some kind of monster filter tucked away in its software that got activated. We'll note that they need to replace the camera once we release your rifle from investigation. I knew better than to press my luck. Maybe they were right. But that didn't explain how I'd seen that same face without reviewing the footage. Instead, they cleared me, slapped me on the shoulder and told me it was a good shoot. Time to go home. I'd get a week off with pay to recover, an appointment with a counselor in case there was any grief to sort out, and then a week of desk duty before I got assigned back to the team. For the most part, that routine would stand. But once we learned who Fringe really was, I'd wind up getting awarded a medal, and the mayor would want to shake my hand and take a picture. Saying goodnight to the rest of the team, they allowed me to enjoy my vacation. But I could tell there was a slight concern from Howell and Darius about how sickly I seemed after the day. They were probably hoping a few days of rest and I'd be back to my usual self. I wish that had been the case. Instead, I headed out, sitting behind the steering wheel of my truck for a good 5 minutes, trying to chase away the visions before I could bring myself to start it. Halfway home, I stopped at a gas station and purchased a pack of cigarettes, a habit I've struggled on and off with since I first joined the military. Surprisingly, they helped, at least seeming to settle my stomach and nerves as I stood in my driveway. The summer night, still exceptionally warm. I smoked 2 of them, one after the other, before stubbing them out underneath my boot, then tossing them into the outside garbage bin. A quick spray of cologne, hoping it would cover the smell, A quick spray of cologne, hoping it would cover the smell, and a spare me lecture from my wife, and I prepared to head inside. Before I even opened the door, I made the decision that I would spare her the details of my day, and she would never deign to ask. Knowing I was protecting her from some of the more grisly details work sometimes caused me. Only a month ago, I finally learned that she had caught the segment on the news, seen me vomiting outside the house. So again, I made things worse for myself by trying to conceal the truth. We ate dinner, watched her evening program. I already miss watching those trashy reality shows with her, and went off to bed. A good night's sleep. That was all I needed, I told myself. Rest, and then I could get my head straightened out in the morning. I'd be back to chasing adrenaline highs in no time. Except that isn't true either. I haven't had what I would consider a good night's sleep in nearly a year. It's hard to sleep when you feel constantly threatened. I had been close to sleeping peacefully. I could hear my wife begin to snore, so I knew she was, when I heard a rattling from the living room. My home is in a more rural area of the county, a lawn that drinks too much water and a lot of open desert brush, so it isn't uncommon for coyotes or other animals to come passing through. But they usually don't come directly up to the house. Something was pawing, scratching at the glass sliding door that looks out from our living room onto the back part of the property. With a heavy sigh, I pulled my pistol from the nightstand and climbed out of bed. At this point, I was inclined to believe this was just an unlucky coincidence. I know now that I'm a fool. Barely had I entered the living room when I saw the dark shape pressed against the door. What looked like a hand pulling at the handle while the other touched the glass. The shape of a head peering in. Again, I got hit by a cold sweat. Felt my heart thumping in my chest. Wanting to think some home intruder had picked the wrong home, I turned the mounted flashlight on my handgun, shined it in the direction of the door, and instantly my hands began to shake. My grip on my pistol loose and weak. My finger not even able to slide into the trigger guard. Was it human? To this day, I'll tell you no. I don't know what it is, but I've seen it several times since. It is humanoid shaped, with 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head. The legs are thick and muscular, as are the arms, but the feet and hands are malformed. Elongated digits, dark yellow nails that look like spikes. Its face is nothing but taut albino skin. A gaping mouth with those sharp teeth and black spittle. And 2 dark solid eyes fixed directly on me as it licked at the glass with a barbed tongue. I wanted to shoot. More than anything, I wanted to pull the trigger until the gun clicked empty. But I couldn't bring myself to. I was afraid that it would shatter the glass and this would come in after me. Instead, we stared. After a moment, it brushed its hands against the glass. An almost affectionate gesture. Then began stepping back until it finally faded out of view. Somehow, I convinced myself to go back to bed, to shut my eyes and try to sleep. But I spent the night with my ear constantly turned for the slightest noise. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was a hallucination, I told myself. Eventually, the sun came up. My wife woke, and she began getting ready for her day. About 30 minutes later, I gave up trying and got out of bed, going into the kitchen and finding her there with 2 cups of coffee. Our morning routine usually brought me some peace, as we both sat at the table together and drank. So what do you have planned today? Probably just going to hang around here. Sure, there's a thing or two that could use my attention or fixing. Sounds like a good idea, she told me, standing up and grabbing her purse, kissing me on the cheek. Maybe you can do something about that sliding door. My coyote must have scratched the hell out of it last night. Well, this is how it started. It is unfortunately not how it's ended. Because as of right now, I still get the occasional visitor at night. And plenty of strange things have happened since. So I may have lied at the beginning. I said this would be my only time sharing. But writing this down has helped me provide a little calm. Though, at the same time, I hate dredging through this story again. But there is more to tell. It is getting late, however. Time for me to try and sleep. And I never know when my nighttime visitor might turn up again. I'm hoping someone knows something, because I am in over my head here. At the very least, thank you for the sympathetic set of eyes. I don't know if this thing will wind up getting the better of me, but at least now people can be aware that there is something evil in Alex County.